My sister Ashley called our dad a loser and stormed out to live with mom and her new husband, Roger. At first, it seemed like she was cutting ties for good, but she came crawling back when she found out about dad's will. That's when the real drama started. I'll never forget the moment she spat out those words. It wasn't just the insult, it was the venom behind it. "You're a loser, Dad," she said, standing in the middle of the living room like it was her stage. "You've wasted your whole life and I'm not going to end up like you." Her voice was sharp, cutting, and final. She had probably been holding it in for months and now it was all boiling over. The room went dead quiet. I was on the couch, scrolling my phone, mid-swipe, when everything froze. Dad was in his chair by the window, his usual spot, and for a second, I thought he'd snap back, yell, argue, anything. But he just stared at her, his shoulders sinking lower like she had physically hit him. It was like watching a balloon deflate in slow motion. Ashley wasn't done. She waved her hands like she was trying to drive the point home. "Look at Roger," she said, her voice climbing. "He's younger than you and he's got his life together. A big house, a real job, vacations, everything you'll never have." I sat there, my mouth dry, throat stuck like I'd swallowed a handful of sand. I wanted to say something, but what could I say? Dad wasn't perfect. He was 57 and spent long days driving a van just to keep the lights on, but he wasn't a failure. He'd raised us when Mom walked out, did the best he could, even if it wasn't glamorous. That had to count for something, right? Ashley didn't see it that way. She turned on her heel, stomped upstairs, and slammed her door. I wanted to check on Dad, but he hadn't moved. He just stared at the floor like he was trying to understand how his own daughter could see him like that. When Ashley came back down, she had a duffel bag in one hand and her phone in the other. "I'm moving in with Mom and Roger," she announced, loud and smug. "At least they know how to live. You should have tried harder, Dad. You could have been somebody." Then she was gone. The screen door slammed behind her and the sound echoed through the house. Dad didn't say a word. He just sat there. Eventually, I asked, "Are you okay?" He shook his head and whispered, "She'll regret this one day when she realizes what really matters." I wasn't so sure. Ashley always landed on her feet. She wanted luxury, space, and a lifestyle that screamed success. Roger's house had all of that. What it didn't have was substance, but Ashley didn't care. Weeks passed without a word from her. Instead, there were Instagram posts. Ashley and Mom by the pool, champagne glasses raised. A shot of Roger's Tesla with the caption, "Manifesting my future." Her new room, twice the size of mine, with its own bathroom. She looked radiant. Meanwhile, Dad was breaking. He didn't talk much and his face was drawn, his shoulders stooped. He started coughing more and his back hurt so much after work that I begged him to see a doctor. He just waved me off, saying it was from too much sitting. Then one evening, out of nowhere, he brought up something serious. I was at the kitchen table trying to finish my homework when he came in holding a folder. He stood there for a moment before saying, "I need to talk to you about something important." I looked up. "What is it?" "I've been thinking," he said, sitting down. "I'm not getting any younger. If something happens to me, I don't want you to worry." I didn't know it then, but Ashley wasn't finished with us, not even close. From the moment he waved it off, saying, "Just being realistic," I knew something was up. It was not like him to get all somber. The guy was practical, sure, but he never talked about writing a will as casually as making a grocery list. When he said he wanted me to have what little he had, I could not help but blink in surprise. I asked about Ashley, hesitant. He sighed, heavier than I had ever heard. "Ashley has made her choice," he said, sitting across from me. "She does not care about this family. If she doesn't care about me now, why would she care when I am gone?" It was not like I could argue. Ashley and Dad had been on a downward spiral for years. Her absence spoke volumes, but apparently, Dad was ready to make it official. When he told Mom about the will a week later, I thought maybe he just wanted her to know, like some nod to their long marriage. I never imagined it would blow up the way it did. Ashley found out. Of course she did. She always had this way of being tuned into drama, like a moth to a flame. I came home one day to find her sprawled on the couch, scrolling on her phone, a duffel bag spilling clothes onto the floor. She looked up with that Cheshire cat grin, like she had not just ghosted us a month ago. "Dad and I talked," she said, like it was nothing. "I am moving back in." I stared, dumbfounded. "Why now?" I asked, my tone sharper than I meant. She shrugged like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I just realized I should be here for him, you know? We're family." She leaned in, her voice dropping. "Besides, you know about the will, right?" There it was. She could not even pretend for 5 minutes. "I mean, it is just smart," she said, her grin widening. "Why should not I get my share? I am the oldest after all. It is only fair." I said nothing. I think she mistook my silence for agreement, but inside, I was fuming. That night, I told Dad everything. His face darkened, but he barely said a word. He just muttered, "She will stay 5 days, tops, then I will make sure she knows exactly where she stands." The next 5 days, absolute chaos. Ashley turned the house into her personal stage. She strutted around like she was doing Dad a favor by being there, all while making it painfully clear she had her eye on that inheritance. Day 1, she redecorated her old room with all the enthusiasm of a kid on Christmas morning. Throw pillows, a vanity, candles. She even claimed they were gifts for Mom. It was laughable. By day 2, she had switched to playing perfect daughter. She cooked dinner, which really meant reheating something from the deli, then made a big show of setting the table. "This is important to me," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "I want us to reconnect as a family." Dad barely acknowledged her. He just ate in silence, his patience wearing thinner by the second. Day 3 was when she started pushing boundaries. She made little comments about family priorities and casually brought up how the oldest usually inherits the most. "Don't you think that's true, Dad?" she asked, batting her eyelashes. Dad put his fork down and finally looked at her. "What I think," he said, his voice calm but cutting, "is that you should not count on something that is not yours." The silence that followed was deafening. Ashley forced a smile, but I could see the fury behind it. By day 4, the gloves were off. She started picking fights, throwing around snide comments about how Dad was tight with money and how I was his favorite. That night, after dinner, she outright yelled, "Why can't you treat me like one?" It all came to a head when Dad, visibly exhausted, got up and left the room. I found him later, sitting on his bed, tears streaming down his face. It was the first time I had seen him cry, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. The 5th day, let's just say Dad kept his promise, but not before the house went through hell. That night felt like one of those bizarre, uncomfortable family dinners where everyone is holding back, except this time Ashley decided to let loose. "I'm your daughter too," she yelled, slamming her fork onto the table. Her voice cracked with anger, but it was the kind of anger that had been brewing for years, and now it was spilling everywhere. "Why can't you treat me like one?" Dad didn't flinch. He calmly pushed his chair back and stood, his face unreadable except for a flicker of something cold in his eyes. "You are not acting like my daughter," he said, his voice steady and deliberate, each word cutting like a razor. "You act like someone who is just here to take. You don't care about me and you never have, so don't pretend you're here out of love. We both know better." Ashley's face twisted with rage, but she didn't say anything. She stormed upstairs, her feet pounding against the steps, and slammed her bedroom door so hard it shook the house. I stayed at the table, trying to look busy with my plate, poking at the cold remnants of spaghetti. The silence was suffocating. "Are you okay?" I finally asked, even though I already knew the answer. Dad sighed, his shoulders sagging just a little. "She's leaving tomorrow," he said almost to himself. "I am done with her games." The next morning, Ashley came downstairs, her hair still a mess but her face set in a mask of defiance. She had her bag slung over her shoulder, muttering under her breath about how this family doesn't appreciate anything. At the door, she turned back to Dad and snapped, "You're still a loser." Nothing's changed. Dad didn't even look at her. "Go back to your mother," he said calmly, barely glancing up from his coffee. "That's where you belong." And just like that, she was gone. For a moment, the house felt lighter, like a storm had passed. But then it hit me. Something wasn't right. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, like the air had been sucked out of the place. Dad threw himself into work, leaving early and coming back late, but when he was home, he spent hours in his chair by the window, staring at nothing in particular. Ashley stayed quiet for a while, which was unusual. She didn't call, didn't text. It was strange, but also unnerving. Ashley was never one to just disappear. Then, about a week later, the phone rang. It was Mom. "I heard from Ashley," she said, skipping any pleasantries. "She's upset." "What is going on over there?" I almost laughed. "What's going on?" She called Dad a loser and left. "What else is new?" Mom sighed, dragging it out in a way that made it clear she thought this was somehow my problem. "Your father could try to understand her. She's under a lot of pressure." "Pressure?" I snapped. "Ashley's life looks more like a vacation than a hardship." Mom ignored the jab. "She's talking about the will," she said finally, her tone cautious. "She thinks your father is being unfair. She wants to talk to him about it again." That stopped me cold. "The will? What about it?" "She thinks it's her right to have a share," Mom said, sounding exasperated. "And she is determined." 2 days later, Ashley showed up unannounced. She walked in like nothing had happened, tossing her bag on the floor and grinning like she owned the place. "Miss me?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake charm. I didn't bother hiding my annoyance. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to Dad," she said, brushing past me. "And don't worry, I'm not staying." She found Dad in the living room, sitting in his usual chair with the TV on low. She didn't waste any time. Dad, we need to talk about the will, she said, her voice firm. Dad didn't even look at her at first. When he finally did, his expression was blank. There's nothing to talk about, he said. Of course there is, Ashley shot back, plopping down on the couch across from him. I am your eldest daughter. I deserve a share of whatever is left. It's not fair to cut me out completely. Dad leaned back, his gaze steady. Fair? He said quietly, almost to himself. Do you even know what that word means? Ashley opened her mouth, but Dad raised a hand to stop her. You walked out on this family, Ashley. You called me a loser because I couldn't give you what Roger could, and now you want to lecture me about fairness? About love? She started to argue, but Dad wasn't finished. His voice stayed calm, but there was an edge to it now, sharp enough to cut through her protests. You do not get to walk back in here and demand anything. You made your choice. Live with it. Ashley stared at him, her face a mixture of shock and anger, but Dad didn't flinch. He just turned his attention back to the TV, dismissing her without another word. For once, she had nothing to say. She grabbed her bag and left without looking back. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Ashley never let anything go, not when there was something to gain. You're not here because you love me. You're here because you think you can get something out of me. But let me tell you right now, Ashley, you won't. The room went so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Ashley's face flickered, her surprise giving way to something colder, sharper. Her lips curled into a tight, bitter smile. Fine, she said, her voice clipped. If that's the way you feel, don't expect me to come crawling back when you need me. I won't, Dad replied, his tone final. Without another word, Ashley grabbed her bag and stormed out, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the frames on the walls. That night, I found Dad sitting in the living room, staring at nothing in particular. The faint light from the TV flickered across his face, but he wasn't watching it. Are you okay? I asked, hesitating by the doorway. He nodded once, his jaw set. I have made my decision, he said firmly. Everything I have will go to you. Ashley made her choice a long time ago, and now she has to live with it. I did not know how to respond. Talking about the will made my stomach churn. I did not want to think about Dad being gone someday, much less about who would get what. All I could do was nod and hope the topic would disappear. But deep down, I knew Ashley wouldn't let it go. She never did. For a while, life seemed to settle back into some version of normal. I went back to school, Dad threw himself into work, and we silently agreed not to bring up Ashley or the will. It was like walking past a wound that neither of us wanted to poke. But 2 weeks later, that illusion of normalcy shattered. It was a quiet Friday night. I was upstairs, scrolling through my phone, half watching a random video, when the doorbell rang. At first, I barely noticed it. Packages came all the time, or sometimes one of Dad's friends would drop by unannounced, but then I heard voices, low, tense, and not at all friendly. I crept out of my room and down the stairs, stopping halfway. From there, I could see Dad standing by the front door, his arms crossed, facing a man I didn't recognize. The stranger was tall, mid-40s, and dressed like he had just stepped out of an expensive catalog. His suit was perfectly tailored, and he held a briefcase in one hand and a business card in the other. I am here on behalf of Roger Williams, the man said, his voice smooth but carrying a subtle edge. My stomach sank. Roger Williams, Mom's husband. The same guy who had swooped into her life like some prince, only to show his true colors after the honeymoon phase ended. Why would he send someone to our house? Dad didn't even glance at the card. What does he want? He asked, his voice low and controlled. The man adjusted his tie like he had all the time in the world. Mr. Williams believes there's been a misunderstanding, he said. He's concerned about how your estate is being managed. He feels it would be in the best interest of your daughters to ensure everything is distributed fairly. Fairly? I almost laughed. This was coming from a guy who probably spent more on his watch than most people made in a year. Dad didn't laugh. He stared at the man with an intensity that could have melted steel. You tell Roger he has no say in how I manage my estate. The man's smile barely faltered, but there was something unsettling behind it. Mr. Williams is not trying to interfere, he said. He simply wants to ensure Ashley is not unfairly excluded. She is your eldest daughter, after all. Dad's jaw tightened, his expression hardening. Ashley does not care about me or this family. She has made that very clear. And Roger does not get to send someone to my house to tell me how to handle my own affairs. The man tilted his head, his smile thinning into something colder. I am not an attorney, Mr. Carter. I am an advisor, and my advice is to reconsider. It would be a shame if this became a legal matter. That was it. I had been standing frozen on the stairs, but hearing that pushed me into action. I came the rest of the way down, my footsteps heavy. A legal matter? I said, my voice sharp. Are you threatening him? The man turned to me, his expression calm but calculated. Not at all, he said smoothly. I am merely pointing out the potential complications of leaving a daughter out of the will. Get out. Dad said, his voice like a knife. Now. For a moment, the man hesitated, his gaze flicking between us. Then he nodded, straightened his tie, and headed for the door. Very well, he said, but I hope you will reconsider. As the door closed behind him, I turned to Dad, my heart pounding. What the hell was that about? Dad shook his head, looking more tired than I had ever seen him. Roger thinks he can push me around, he said quietly. He's wrong. I didn't know what to think. All I knew was that this was far from over. Roger hiring someone to come to our house felt like a line had been crossed. Ashley's antics were bad enough, but now this? It was like they were playing a game of intimidation, trying to corner Dad into changing his mind. Only they clearly underestimated him. Dad wasn't the kind of guy who scared easily. If anything, their stunt seemed to fuel his resolve. This isn't over, he muttered, almost to himself, and he was right. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. When Roger's so-called consultant knocked on our door, things escalated faster than I expected. To be honest, I thought Dad would just brush it off. He wasn't the type to make waves, usually. But something about this set him off. That night, he didn't say much to me, just told me to focus on school and let him handle it. It wasn't until the next morning that I realized just how serious he was. Dad spent the entire day on the phone. I only caught fragments of his conversations, but it was enough to know he wasn't messing around. Legal jargon, unfamiliar names, and ominous phrases like "put an end to this nonsense" filled the air. His voice was calm, but there was a sharpness to it. A quiet, deliberate edge that made it clear he wasn't backing down. By the end of the week, he called me into the living room. "It's done," he said, almost casually. "What's done?" I asked, confused. "Roger, Ashley, everything. They won't bother us anymore." It turns out Dad had tapped into a network of people he hadn't mentioned in years, old colleagues from his more high-profile days. He contacted a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but the kind that makes people sit up and take notice. Together, they drafted a letter that left no room for interpretation. If Roger, Mom, or Ashley continued to meddle, they'd be facing a harassment lawsuit. And, as Dad put it with a small but knowing grin, Roger doesn't want that kind of attention. Within days, the calls and texts stopped cold. Ashley and Roger disappeared, and so did their so-called consultant. For the first time in months, it felt like we could breathe again. But Dad wasn't about to leave any loose ends. He began revising his will, making sure everything was locked up tight. There would be no surprises or loopholes, not this time. He even wrote a letter to be included with the will, explaining in no uncertain terms why Ashley was cut out. She made her choice, he said. Now she has to live with it. After that, it was like they vanished from our lives. No phone calls, no letters, nothing. We didn't reach out either. It was as if a clean break had been made, and honestly, it was for the best. They had their lives, and we had ours. Life settled into something resembling normalcy. Dad and I found a rhythm. Quiet, but peaceful. For a long time, that was enough. Then, about a year ago, something completely unexpected happened. I ran into Jake. We'd gone to high school together, but hadn't seen each other in years. It was one of those chance meetings at a coffee shop, the kind you don't think much of until it changes everything. Jake was kind, funny, and genuinely interested in me. When things got serious, I brought him home to meet Dad. I was nervous. Dad had every reason to be protective after everything we'd been through. But to my surprise, he liked Jake immediately. A few months later, when Jake mentioned he was looking for a new place to live, Dad made the suggestion that changed everything. "Why not move in here?" he said. "The house is big enough and he's a good kid." Jake moved in, and it turned out to be one of the best decisions we'd ever made. He fit into our lives seamlessly, helping out around the house, running errands, and even sitting with Dad on Sundays to watch football. Dad seemed lighter, happier. He still had health issues, but he was doing better. And for the first time in years, it felt like we were a real family again. As for Ashley, I have no idea what she's up to, and frankly, I don't care. She made her choice and we made ours. Life isn't perfect, but it's ours. And for now, that's more than enough.